Before the Russian Empire collapsed into revolution and bloodshed, it was held together by the quiet devotion of two people who believed that love, faith, and family could overcome even the greatest storms. Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov first met Princess Alex of Hesse when they were still young members of Europe's interconnected royal families. And although duty surrounded them from childhood, affection slowly grew into a deep and enduring bond. Alex was the granddaughter of Britain's Queen Victoria, while Nicholas was heir to one of the largest empires on earth. Yet their relationship began not with politics, but with sincere admiration and heartfelt letters. Nicholas filled his diary with thoughts of the shy German princess, whose gentle smile stayed in his mind long after every royal gathering ended. Alex struggled with the reality that marrying the future Tsar meant leaving her homeland, changing her religion, and accepting a life she knew would never truly belong to her. Despite those sacrifices, she ultimately chose Nicholas because she believed that a life without him would be far lonelier than any throne could ever make her. Their engagement in 1894 was celebrated across European courts, but happiness was already shadowed by tragedy because Nicholas's father, Tsar Alexander III, was dying from severe illness. Only days after his father's death, Nicholas inherited the Russian throne while still grieving. And the young couple found themselves standing before an empire that expected certainty from two people who were still learning how to carry immense responsibility. Their wedding took place only weeks after the funeral, creating the painful impression that joy and mourning had become forever intertwined from the very beginning of their marriage. For Nicholas and Alexandra, marriage became a refuge from the relentless pressures of imperial life, rather than a political partnership built on appearances alone. Unlike many royal couples of their era, they genuinely enjoyed each other's company and preferred quiet evenings together over lavish social events. They exchanged affectionate letters even when separated for only a short time, calling each other by tender nicknames and sharing intimate thoughts that revealed remarkable emotional closeness. Nicholas often described Alexandra as his greatest comfort, while Alexandra believed that her husband possessed a kind and gentle heart hidden beneath the enormous weight of his crown. Inside the palace, they created an unusually warm family atmosphere, choosing to spend as much time as possible with their children instead of treating them as distant royal heirs. Friends and servants frequently observed that the Tsar transformed from an emperor into an affectionate father the moment he entered the nursery. To the outside world, they represented unimaginable wealth and absolute power. Yet within their private rooms, they treasured simple conversations, shared prayers, family games, and evenings spent reading together. The Romanov marriage was not perfect, but it was built upon genuine loyalty that survived public criticism, political turmoil, and personal heartbreak. Long before the revolution threatened their lives, the greatest source of both their happiness and their future suffering had already begun to grow within their expanding family. Their first child, Grand Duchess Olga, arrived in 1895 and filled the palace with celebration and hope. She was followed by Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, four daughters whose playful personalities transformed the imperial residence into a home filled with laughter. Although Nicholas adored every one of his daughters without hesitation, the Russian monarchy depended upon the birth of a male heir to secure the succession. The pressure placed upon Alexandra became overwhelming as newspapers, aristocrats, and government officials quietly questioned whether she would ever give birth to a future emperor. Finally, in 1904, their long-awaited son, Alexei Nikolaevich, entered the world, and the entire empire rejoiced at the arrival of the young Tsarevich. The celebrations soon gave way to fear when the imperial family discovered that Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a hereditary disease inherited through Queen Victoria's descendants that prevented his blood from clotting properly. Even the smallest injury threatened his life, turning ordinary childhood accidents into terrifying medical emergencies. Nicholas blamed no one and devoted himself to comforting both his wife and son whenever another painful episode struck the fragile young prince. Alexandra lived in constant anxiety, praying endlessly beside Alexei's bed and searching desperately for anything that might preserve the life of the child she believed God had entrusted to her. The illness that remained hidden from most of the empire gradually isolated the royal family from the world around them and opened the door to decisions that would later have devastating political consequences. As Alexei's condition worsened, Alexandra became increasingly desperate for hope, wherever she could find it. That search eventually brought Grigory Rasputin into the imperial family's life, a wandering Siberian mystic whose apparent ability to calm Alexei during medical crises convinced Alexandra that he had been sent by divine providence. Whether through coincidence, psychological comfort, or the limitations of medical treatment at the time, Rasputin sometimes appeared to ease the boy's suffering when physicians could not. Nicholas trusted his wife's judgment because he witnessed her unbearable fear every time Alexei faced another potentially fatal injury. Outside the palace, however, Rasputin's growing influence fueled rumors, scandal, and public outrage that severely damaged confidence in the monarchy. Many Russians came to believe that the imperial government was being manipulated by an untrustworthy holy man, rather than guided by experienced statesmen. The couple who had built their marriage upon mutual trust found themselves increasingly isolated from advisors who questioned Alexandra's decisions. Instead of strengthening the throne, every attempt they made to protect their son deepened public suspicion and widened the gap between the royal family and the people they ruled. Love continued to unite Nicholas and Alexandra, but the empire surrounding them was slowly beginning to fall apart. The first years of the 20th century brought unrest that no amount of personal devotion could overcome. Industrialization, poverty, political repression, and military failures fueled widespread dissatisfaction throughout the Russian Empire. The disastrous Russo-Japanese War weakened confidence in Nicholas's leadership and exposed serious problems within the government. In 1905, peaceful demonstrators marched toward the Winter Palace, hoping to present a petition directly to their emperor. Instead, imperial troops fired upon the crowd during the tragedy remembered as Bloody Sunday, forever changing the relationship between the monarchy and many ordinary Russians. Although Nicholas was not personally present when the shooting occurred, public trust in him suffered a wound that never fully healed. Determined to preserve stability, he introduced limited constitutional reforms. Yet many believed those changes did not go far enough, while others believed they had already gone too far. Caught between competing demands, Nicholas struggled to satisfy reformers without abandoning the principles upon which the Romanov dynasty had ruled for centuries. The loving husband who found peace within his family increasingly carried the burden of governing a nation that seemed impossible to unite. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Nicholas believed it was his duty to stand beside Russia and defend its allies. Millions of Russian soldiers entered the conflict with courage, but the empire soon suffered staggering casualties, inadequate supplies, and repeated military defeats. In 1915, Nicholas made the fateful decision to assume personal command of the armed forces, leaving Alexandra to oversee many affairs of government in the capital. Separated by war, the couple returned to the habit that had sustained them since their youth by exchanging deeply affectionate letters filled with encouragement, prayers, and unwavering faith in one another. Their correspondence revealed two spouses trying desperately to reassure each other while the world around them descended into chaos. Meanwhile, food shortages, inflation, labor strikes, and political instability continued to intensify across Russia. Every setback at the front became another reason for critics to blame the emperor, while every unpopular decision in Petrograd further damaged Alexandra's already fragile public reputation. The bond between husband and wife never weakened, but the foundation beneath the Russian Empire was collapsing faster than either of them fully understood. History was preparing to test not only the endurance of a monarchy, but also the strength of a family determined to remain together until the end. By early 1917, the Russian people had reached a breaking point after years of war, hardship, and uncertainty. Mass demonstrations filled the streets of Petrograd as workers demanded bread, peace, and fundamental political change. Military units that had once defended the monarchy increasingly refused to suppress the growing unrest. Faced with overwhelming pressure and dwindling support, Nicholas II signed the document that ended more than 300 years of Romanov rule. His greatest concern after abdicating was not the loss of his crown, but the safety of Alexandra and their 5 children. The family was placed under house arrest, first at the Alexander Palace and later transported deep into Siberia, before finally arriving in Yekaterinburg. Accustomed to imperial ceremony, they now lived under strict supervision, uncertain whether they would eventually be exiled, exchanged, or executed. Despite losing almost everything, witnesses recalled that Nicholas continued reading aloud to his children, while Alexandra maintained daily prayers that bound the family together. The empire had vanished, but the love that united the Romanovs remained remarkably unchanged. Life in captivity stripped away every remaining symbol of imperial privilege and revealed the ordinary humanity of the family behind the throne. The daughters sewed clothes, cleaned rooms, read books, and comforted one another while trying to preserve dignity under increasingly harsh conditions. Alexei's illness continued to trouble him, limiting his movement and making every relocation especially painful. Nicholas quietly chopped wood, performed household chores, and attempted to shield his family from fear, even though he understood how uncertain their future had become. The guards varied greatly in their treatment, with some showing moments of respect, while others deliberately humiliated the former imperial family. Letters became rare, news from the outside world almost disappeared, and hope slowly gave way to anxious waiting. Yet family members continued celebrating birthdays, sharing meals, and praying together whenever circumstances allowed. Their palace had become a prison, but within those confined walls they still found strength in one another's presence. It was perhaps during these final months that the love between Nicholas and Alexandra became most visible, because it no longer depended upon crowns, titles, or power. During the night of July 16th and the early hours of July 17th, 1908, the family was awakened and told they needed to move because of unrest approaching the city. Nicholas carried the weak and exhausted Alexei downstairs while Alexandra and the daughters followed with quiet obedience, believing they were preparing for another transfer. They were led into a small basement room where chairs were provided for Alexandra and the sick young heir. Moments later, armed men entered and announced that the former emperor had been sentenced to death. Before the family could fully understand what was happening, gunfire erupted throughout the room. Nicholas, Alexandra, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, Alexei, and several loyal attendants were all killed in one of the most tragic executions of the 20th century. Their bodies were secretly removed, hidden, and buried in an attempt to erase both the victims and the memory of the Romanov dynasty. For decades, the Soviet government concealed many details surrounding the murders, allowing rumors and legends to flourish across the world. Among the most famous stories was the belief that Anastasia had somehow escaped, a mystery that endured until modern forensic evidence finally confirmed that none of the imperial children survived. Long after the guns fell silent, historians began uncovering the full story through diaries, letters, eyewitness accounts, and eventually the discovery and scientific identification of the Romanov remains. Those private writings revealed not distant rulers obsessed with power, but a husband and wife deeply devoted to each other, despite the catastrophic failures that surrounded their reign. Nicholas remained tender toward Alexandra until his final day, and Alexandra never stopped believing that her husband's goodness would ultimately prevail against hatred. Their political decisions continue to inspire debate among scholars. Yet, the sincerity of their marriage is rarely questioned by those who study their personal correspondence. The Romanovs lost an empire, but they never abandoned one another, even when they faced imprisonment, uncertainty, and death together. Their story endures because it reminds us that genuine love can exist inside the highest palace just as easily as it can survive within the darkest prison. History remembers them as the last imperial family of Russia, but their children remembered them simply as devoted parents who never stopped trying to protect them. More than a century later, the final embrace of Nicholas and Alexandra remains one of history's most heartbreaking reminders that even the greatest love cannot always escape the tides of revolution. Their crowns disappeared, their dynasty ended, and their world was destroyed. Yet the enduring story of their family continues to move hearts because love was the one treasure that neither war nor death could ever truly take away.